Our journey begins in the Antebellum South, a land of stark contrasts and deeply entrenched social orders, specifically in the year 1847. We find ourselves amidst the sprawling cotton fields of Wilkes County, Georgia, where the Caldwell estate stood as a testament to prosperity and tradition. The plantation house itself, an architectural marvel with its imposing white columns and wraparound porch, was more than just a home. It was a symbol, often referred to as the jewel of the region. Perched atop a gentle hill, it commanded a view over nearly 800 acres, an empire built on the back of enslaved labor, embodying the very essence of Southern aristocratic life. The Caldwell name itself carried immense weight within local society. Their considerable wealth afforded them influence and status, yet it was their twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine Caldwell, who were the subject of hushed conversations and curious glances throughout the county. Identical in appearance, down to a small distinctive birthmark above their right eyebrows, the twins had celebrated their 22nd birthday that spring. This age was well past the societal expectation for young women of their station, who typically would have been married with children, firmly established within the social fabric. Their unmarried status, though not overtly scandalous, hinted at an independence that quietly set them apart. What few outside the confines of the plantation walls understood was the brewing storm beneath this placid surface. Behind the perfectly maintained facade of Southern gentility, a series of events had been set in motion. Subtle at first, then gaining unstoppable momentum that would ultimately unravel the very fabric of the Caldwell legacy. The truth, when it finally surfaced many decades later, would challenge every preconceived notion of their lives and the society they inhabited. County records, uncovered serendipitously during a courthouse renovation in 1952, provided the foundational understanding of the twins' early lives. Their mother, tragically, had died during their birth, leaving their father, Thomas Caldwell, to raise them alone. Thomas, a man of considerable drive and ambition, never remarried. Instead, he channeled his life's energy into two primary pursuits: the meticulous upbringing of his twin daughters and the relentless expansion of his cotton empire. His dedication to them was absolute, yet perhaps it also left a void, an absence of a guiding feminine presence that might have shaped their adherence to societal norms differently. The first tangible indication that something was amiss at the Caldwell plantation came in a seemingly innocuous form: a letter. It was penned by Margaret Sullivan, the family's longtime housekeeper, to her sister in Savannah. Dated April 8, 1847, the letter contained a curious observation. The young misses have taken to spending unusual amounts of time in the quarters, something the master seems strangely unconcerned about. This seemingly casual remark, discovered over a century later tucked inside a family Bible preserved between its venerable pages, served as the earliest documented clue to the extraordinary events unfolding. The quarters Margaret referred to were, of course, the slave quarters, a cluster of small wooden structures located approximately half a mile from the main house, deliberately obscured from view by a stand of oak trees. The Caldwell plantation maintained approximately 70 enslaved individuals, a number considered modest compared to some of the sprawling neighboring estates, yet sufficient to sustain the vast agricultural operations and the demands of the household. Among these enslaved people were two men whose destinies would become inextricably linked with those of the Caldwell twins, Samuel and Elijah. plantation records, carefully preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives, listed them simply by their first names. Both were noted as having been purchased in 1842 from a plantation in South Carolina that had fallen into financial distress. This detail suggests they were not native to Wilkes County, bringing with them potentially different experiences and perspectives. What made Samuel and Elijah truly unusual, a fact compiled decades later by local historian William Hartwell, was their education. Both men had been taught to read and write by their previous owners' children, a highly dangerous skill in the antebellum South, where literacy among enslaved people was often forbidden and punishable. They had, understandably, carefully concealed this ability upon their arrival at the Caldwell plantation. This concealment, however, proved unsustainable. In the autumn of 1846, their secret was irrevocably breached. One late evening, Catherine Caldwell, perhaps on a restless stroll or tending to some task, discovered Samuel reading a discarded newspaper in the stables. The weight of that moment, the silent understanding that passed between them, must have been immense. Instead of reporting this illegal activity, an act that would have resulted in severe punishment for Samuel, Catherine made a choice that diverged sharply from societal expectations. According to her personal diary, recovered in 1964 during the demolition of the old plantation house, she began to meet Samuel in secret. Her diary entries from this period became increasingly cryptic, filled with references to sis, likely a shorthand for clandestine or secrets, and our shared understanding. This suggests a deepening intellectual and emotional bond that transcended the brutal social hierarchy of their time. Simultaneously, estate records show a subtle but significant change. Samuel was reassigned from field work to the stables, a position that, whether intentional or not, afforded him greater proximity to the main house and, by extension, to Catherine. While historical records do not provide the same clarity for Elizabeth, local oral tradition strongly suggests a parallel development. It speaks of Elizabeth forming a similar connection with Elijah, who primarily worked in the maintenance of the plantation's extensive gardens. The symmetry of these emerging relationships, twin sisters forming forbidden bonds with two enslaved men, creates an unsettling pattern. This peculiar mirroring of forbidden affections, as one local newspaper would later describe it, hints at a profound psychological and emotional resonance between the sisters, perhaps even a shared defiance of the rigid world into which they were born. The winter of 1846 to 1847 proved unusually harsh in Georgia. Freezing temperatures ravaged cotton stores, the lifeblood of the plantation economy, and created a pervasive sense of isolation as roads became impassable. It was during these cold and closed months, when the outside world receded, that the relationships between the twins and the enslaved men apparently deepened, nurtured by the very solitude that gripped the estate. A letter from Thomas Caldwell to his brother in Charleston, dated January 23, 1847, reveals his burgeoning concern, albeit through a clouded lens of misinterpretation. He wrote of a strange melancholy that has overtaken Elizabeth, while Catherine seems almost feverishly animated. He concluded, "I fear the isolation of this winter has affected their temperaments in opposite ways." Thomas, tragically, failed to perceive the true nature of his daughter's emotional states. They were not suffering from mere winter melancholy or cabin fever. They were in fact engaged in a dangerous game of secrets and forbidden relationships, a profound transgression of every social code of their time and place. The consequences of discovery, they knew, would be devastating, not only for Samuel and Elijah, who faced unimaginable torture or execution, but also for the Caldwell name itself, which would be irreparably tarnished. The first concrete, undeniable evidence of the true nature of these relationships emerged in a series of coded messages. These notes were discovered pressed between the pages of a volume of poetry belonging to Elizabeth. Written on scraps of paper and meticulously dated throughout February 1847, they contained what appeared to be arrangements for meetings and ardent expressions of devotion. One note, particularly revealing, reads, "The usual place at midnight. The moon will be new, offering cover. He says C and S will join, 4 hearts beating as 2. This suggests a level of coordination that transcends individual passion. The implication that the twins were not only aware of each other's forbidden relationships, but were actively coordinating their clandestine meetings adds a layer of conspiracy and shared purpose to the unfolding narrative. Rather than acting independently, the sisters appeared to be operating in concert, their identical appearances perhaps even being strategically used to confuse and misdirect any potential suspicion, turning a shared physical trait into a tool of rebellion. The inevitable turning point came on March 15, 1847, a day that would forever alter the course of their lives. At dinner, Thomas Caldwell made a momentous announcement. He had arranged marriages for both his daughters to the sons of prominent plantation owners in neighboring counties. This was the culmination of his fatherly duty, a secure future for his beloved twins within their expected station. According to Catherine's diary, this announcement was met with outward composure, a carefully constructed facade. But internally, she wrote, "Beneath my smile, my heart turned to stone." Elizabeth's reaction is not explicitly recorded, but subsequent events strongly suggest she shared her sister's profound opposition to their father's plans. This forced marriage, designed to cement their place in society, became the catalyst for their ultimate act of defiance. Just 3 days after this announcement, in the pre-dawn hours of March 18, 1847, an event occurred that would forever change the course of the Caldwell family history. The plantation's overseer, James Whittaker, was awakened by what he later described in a deposition as a commotion unlike any I had heard before. Investigating, he discovered a small fire had been set in one of the storage buildings near the slave quarters. While the fire itself was quickly contained, causing minimal damage, the ensuing confusion and alarm revealed a far more significant problem. Samuel, Elijah, and the Caldwell twins were nowhere to be found. A search was immediately organized, the alarm spreading rapidly to neighboring plantations. Search parties were dispatched along every road and trail leading from the Caldwell property, igniting one of the largest manhunts in county history. The initial assumption, meticulously recorded in Whittaker's journal, was that the enslaved men had escaped and, in an act of unfathomable boldness, had abducted the Caldwell daughters. A substantial reward was offered for their capture, escalating the situation into a widespread panic. Thomas Caldwell, according to accounts from those present, became a man possessed, barely eating or sleeping as the frantic search continued, his despair deepening with each passing day. What the search parties did not know, and what would not be discovered until much later, was the true nature of the fire. It had been deliberately set by Elizabeth as a distraction, a calculated move in their desperate bid for freedom. This crucial detail would only emerge in 1868, when a former house servant named Ruth provided testimony to a northern journalist documenting stories of the Antebellum South. According to Ruth, Elizabeth had confided in her just hours before the fire, instructing her to remain silent about what she knew. Ruth's silent complicity, driven perhaps by empathy or a quiet hope for their success, proved invaluable.
The search for the missing quartet continued for weeks, expanding into neighboring counties and eventually across state lines, a testament to the Caldwell family's influence and the perceived audacity of the abduction. Meanwhile, Thomas Caldwell's health rapidly deteriorated under the weight of grief and public scrutiny. Plantation records indicate that by April he had taken to his bed, attended only by his longtime house servant and a physician from Augusta, who was called to the plantation twice during this period, signifying the gravity of his condition. Then, on May 2, 1847, a letter arrived at the Caldwell plantation. The contents of this letter have never been fully disclosed in any public record, remaining one of the enduring mysteries of the case. However, its effect was immediate and devastating. Thomas Caldwell, upon reading it, suffered what his physician described as a paroxysm of rage, followed by a complete collapse from which he did not recover. He died 3 days later, the cause listed simply as apoplexy, a common medical term at the time for what we now recognize as a stroke. The letter, undoubtedly from his daughters, must have shattered his world, exposing the truth of their willing departure and the fundamental challenge it posed to his deeply held beliefs and his family's honor. Following Thomas's death, control of the plantation passed to his brother, Edward Caldwell, who traveled to Charleston to assume management of the estate. Edward, a man of meticulous habits and a desire to restore order, began a thorough review of the plantation's affairs. It was during this methodical process that a startling discovery was made in Thomas's private study. Edward found a small wooden box, unassuming in appearance, but holding explosive contents. Inside were what appeared to be marriage certificates, crudely drawn, perhaps even hastily prepared, but bearing signatures that purported to record the marriage of Elizabeth Caldwell to Elijah and Catherine Caldwell to Samuel on the night of March 17, 1847, just hours before their disappearance. The certificates were accompanied by a poignant letter, seemingly written by Catherine. In it, she explained that the twins had fallen in love with the two men and, knowing their father would never approve, had devised a plan to escape together. The letter described months of secret planning, saving small items, preparing for a perilous journey north to states where they might live, if not openly, then at least without the immediate threat of capture and separation.
Most disturbing to Edward, and profoundly challenging to the prevailing narrative, was the revelation that his nieces had not been abducted. They had gone willingly, choosing to abandon their privileged positions, their esteemed family name, and their entire social world for what Catherine described as the only true happiness we have ever known. The letter concluded with a heartfelt, if perhaps naive, request that their father try to understand and forgive them, though they recognized the unlikelihood of either. Edward Caldwell, a man deeply entrenched in the social and racial hierarchies of his time, faced an agonizing decision. After consulting with legal advisors and influential family connections, he made a choice that would profoundly shape how the incident would be remembered for generations. He buried the evidence. The certificates and Catherine's letter were returned to the wooden box and sealed away, hidden from public view. Publicly, he maintained the story that his nieces had been abducted, possibly murdered by escaped slaves. The search continued, albeit with a grim shift in focus, now centered on recovering bodies rather than living persons. This official narrative, meticulously crafted and relentlessly propagated by Edward, persisted for nearly 2 decades, cementing a tragic but socially palatable version of events. The narrative held sway until a pivotal development in 1865, following the seismic shifts of the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved people throughout the South. a woman arrived at what remained of the Caldwell plantation, by then reduced to less than half its former size, and struggling to adapt to the new economic reality. The woman identified herself as Margaret Johnson, but her striking resemblance to the long-missing Caldwell twins was unmistakable, a ghostly echo from the past. She requested a meeting with Edward Caldwell, who, though in greatly reduced circumstances, still maintained ownership of the property. According to household staff present that day, the meeting lasted several tense hours, with raised voices occasionally audible through the closed doors of the study. When Margaret Johnson finally departed, Edward Caldwell emerged visibly shaken, a man profoundly disturbed by the encounter. He spoke to no one about the details of the meeting, but immediately began liquidating what remained of the estate. Within 6 months, the plantation was sold, and Edward returned to Charleston, where he lived in seclusion until his death in 1871, carrying the burden of his secret. The true nature of that pivotal meeting remained unknown until 1958, when a collection of letters was donated to the Georgia Historical Society by Edward's granddaughter. Among these was a detailed account of the meeting, written by Edward to his wife the day after it occurred, a private confession of a profound shock. According to Edward's letter, Margaret Johnson was indeed Catherine Caldwell, now using the surname of her husband Samuel, who had adopted the name Samuel Johnson after their escape. Catherine revealed that she, Elizabeth, Elijah, and Samuel had managed to reach Philadelphia, where they found refuge and support within a vibrant community of free blacks and abolitionists who helped them establish new identities. Elizabeth and Elijah, adopting the surname Davis, had moved further north to Boston, where Elijah found work as a carpenter. Samuel, leveraging his knowledge of horses, eventually established a small but successful livery stable in Philadelphia, while Catherine worked as a seamstress. They had children. Catherine and Samuel had 3, Elizabeth and Elijah 2. All of whom were being raised with no knowledge of their mother's true privileged Southern origins. Catherine had returned south only after learning of her uncle's management of the former plantation, hoping to retrieve personal items belonging to her mother that had been left behind during their desperate escape. More significantly, she sought to correct the historical record, to make it known that she and her sister had not been victims of abduction, but had instead made a conscious choice, a radical, dangerous choice, to follow their hearts despite the overwhelming social and legal barriers of their era. Edward, however, remained resolute in his refusal. In his letter, he explained that he could not bring himself to reveal the truth, writing that the shame it would bring upon our name, upon the memory of my brother, is too great to contemplate. He offered Catherine a substantial sum of money in exchange for her continued silence and her promise never to return to Georgia. Whether Catherine accepted this offer is not explicitly recorded in Edward's letter, but historical records show that Margaret Johnson purchased a ticket for Philadelphia the day after the meeting and never returned to Georgia. The Caldwell family narrative of the tragic abduction and presumed death of the twins thus remained the official story for another generation. In 1883, a fire destroyed much of the courthouse in Wilkes County, including many records from the Antebellum period. This loss further obscured the already murky details of the Caldwell case, making it even harder to piece together the truth. By the turn of the century, the story had transformed into a local legend, a tale whispered with various embellishments and supernatural elements, often overshadowing what had been, at its core, a very human story of forbidden love, desperate choices, and profound moral courage.
It wasn't until 1964, during the previously mentioned demolition of the original Caldwell Plantation house, that Catherine's diary was discovered in a small compartment built into the wall of what had been her bedroom. This leather-bound volume, covering the period from January 1846 to March 1847, provided the first contemporaneous account of the events directly from one of the participants. The diary revealed a complex and nuanced picture of the relationships between the twins and the enslaved men. Catherine wrote of her initial shock at discovering Samuel's literacy, followed by an intense curiosity that blossomed into a genuine intellectual connection and eventually profound love. She vividly described their late-night conversations about philosophy, religion, and the radical concept of freedom, discussions that fundamentally transformed her understanding of the world and her place within it. Particularly poignant were her descriptions of the moral crisis she experienced as she came to recognize the fundamental humanity of a man whom society had relentlessly taught her to view as property. "I have been blind," she wrote on November 12, 1846, "not only to the suffering around me, but to the very nature of what it means to be human. S has opened my eyes, and now I cannot close them again, though the light sometimes pains me." This powerful entry highlights her moral awakening, the painful realization of the injustice inherent in the system from which she had benefited. The diary also confirmed the twins' mutual awareness and steadfast support of each other's relationships. Catherine described late-night conversations with Elizabeth, their shared fears and hopes, and their gradually evolving plan to escape. The final entry, dated March 16, 1847, reads simply, chillingly, "Tomorrow we leave everything we have known for an uncertain future. We may find freedom or death, but either is preferable to living a lie." The discovery of Catherine's diary prompted renewed and fervent interest in the case among historians specializing in the antebellum South. Research conducted throughout the 1960s unearthed additional pieces of the complex puzzle. This included shipping records showing passage booked for 4 individuals from Savannah to Philadelphia in late March 1847 under the names Johnson and Davis, corroborating their escape route. Census records from Philadelphia in 1850 confirmed the presence of Samuel and Catherine Johnson, listed as mulatto, living in a predominantly black neighborhood with 2 children. Similarly, Boston records showed an Elijah and Elizabeth Davis with 1 child, also identified as mulatto, further substantiating their new lives and integrated identities.
Perhaps the most remarkable discovery came in 1968, when a descendant of Elizabeth and Elijah Davis contacted researchers after learning of the renewed historical interest. This descendant, a professor at a New England university, possessed a priceless collection of letters exchanged between the twins throughout the 1850s and 60s. These letters painted a vivid picture of 2 women who, despite the enormous sacrifices they had made, found fulfillment and purpose in their chosen lives. They wrote of their children, their daily work, their continuing education, and their active involvement in abolitionist causes, demonstrating a profound commitment to justice. They also expressed ongoing concern about discovery, particularly after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which significantly increased the danger for everyone involved, making their lives a constant tightrope walk. The most revealing letter, dated July 4, 1865, shortly after the end of the Civil War, captured Catherine's profound reflection on their extraordinary journey. "Today marks not only the independence of this nation, but at long last our own true freedom," she wrote. "For 18 years we have lived in shadows, always looking over our shoulders. Now, though many challenges remain, we may finally step into the light. Yet I find myself thinking of Father, wondering if in some way he might finally understand the choice we made. I like to believe that freed from the constraints of the world that shaped him, he might. This passage offers a glimpse into Catherine's enduring hope for understanding, even from beyond the grave, and her recognition of the profound societal forces that had shaped her father's worldview. By 1969, enough documentary and personal evidence had been gathered to substantially revise the historical understanding of what had come to be known as the Caldwell twins incident. What had long been characterized as an abduction and presumed murder was definitively revealed to be something far more complex and revolutionary, a deliberate rejection of the social order by two young women who chose love and moral principle over family privilege and societal safety. The descendants of the Caldwell twins, now scattered across the northern United States, have generally chosen to maintain their privacy, with only a few agreeing to limited interviews with historians. These interviews, conducted primarily in the 1970s, revealed families who had grown up with carefully edited versions of their ancestry, typically told that their great-grandmothers were Northern women who had married men of mixed-race heritage. The full, astonishing truth that these women were the daughters of a Georgia plantation owner who had fallen in love with enslaved men on their father's plantation, staged their own abduction, and fled north to build new lives, was often not revealed until adulthood, if at all. Some descendants expressed profound pride in their ancestors' courage and moral clarity, while others struggled with the complex and often painful moral implications of a family history intertwined with both slave ownership and courageous resistance to slavery.
The former Caldwell plantation has since been subdivided and developed, with little remaining to mark the location of the extraordinary events described. A small historical marker, erected in 1972 at the intersection nearest to where the main house once stood, makes only a brief generic reference to the historically significant Caldwell family plantation, with no mention of the twins or their extraordinary story, a testament to the persistent discomfort with the truth. Local attitudes toward the story have, however, evolved over time, from initial shock and denial to a more nuanced recognition of its profound significance as a rare documented case of white Southern women actively rejecting and escaping the slave society in which they were raised. Academic interest in the case has grown, particularly among scholars studying resistance to slavery and interracial relationships in the antebellum period. What remains most compelling about the Caldwell twins' story is how it powerfully challenges simplified narratives about the antebellum South. It reveals the potential for individual moral awakening, even among those who benefited most directly from the existing social order. It demonstrates how deeply personal connections could sometimes transcend the rigid boundaries of race and status, even as it starkly reminds us how exceptional and dangerously subversive such transgressions were. In Catherine's diary, she wrote, "We did not choose to be born into this world of masters and slaves, but we can choose whether to accept it." In making their choice, the Caldwell twins left behind a legacy that continues to resonate, a testament to the possibility that even in the darkest corners of human history, individuals might find the courage to follow their conscience, whatever the cost. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the story is the profound silence that followed their actions, how effectively the truth was buried, and how completely the narrative was controlled by those who remained behind. It serves as a stark reminder of how many similar stories of defiance and love may have been lost to history, leaving us to wonder how many other acts of resistance, both large and small, have gone unrecorded and unremembered. In the end, what we know of Elizabeth and Catherine Caldwell, of Samuel and Elijah, comes to us only in fragments: diary pages, letters with missing context, official records that tell us when they were born but not how they truly lived.
census entries that confirm their existence but tell us nothing of their deepest dreams. We are left to imagine the immense courage it took to step into the night, leaving behind everything familiar for the uncertain promise of something true. The grand plantation house where they grew up is gone now. The fields where Samuel and Elijah toiled have been transformed by time and development. All that remains is the story itself, preserved not in monuments or grand markers, but in archives, academic papers, and the tenacious memory of families. A whisper from the past that continues to ask uncomfortable questions of the present. As for the wooden box containing those crude marriage certificates, the tangible evidence of that forbidden pact made on a March night in 1847, its whereabouts remain unknown. Some historians believe Edward Caldwell destroyed it before his death, unable to reconcile himself to its profound implications. Others suggest it may still exist, hidden away in some forgotten collection, waiting patiently to be discovered once again, much like the truth it so powerfully contains. The search for that truth continues, not just for historians, but for all who seek to understand the complexities of our shared past. In that ongoing search, the story of the Caldwell twins stands as a powerful reminder that history is not just a record of laws and wars and the deeds of great men, but also, and perhaps most importantly, of individual hearts and minds, of small acts of courage that sometimes change everything.
In 1966, a remarkable document surfaced during an estate sale in Philadelphia. A small leather-bound journal, water-damaged but remarkably legible, was discovered inside a false bottom drawer of an antique writing desk. The journal belonged to Samuel Johnson, formerly Samuel of the Caldwell Plantation, and contained entries spanning from 1848 to 1859. This discovery provided the first written account directly from one of the enslaved men involved in the escape, offering an invaluable new perspective. Samuel's journal revealed details previously unknown about the escape plan and its meticulous execution. He wrote of the painstaking preparation, how over months they had gathered essential supplies, studied rudimentary maps, and memorized the routes of the Underground Railroad, often learning from whispers and coded messages among the enslaved community. Most strikingly, he described their perilous journey north, a harrowing 6-week ordeal of traveling primarily by night, hiding during daylight hours in various safe houses or secluded natural spots, and relying on a vital network of sympathetic individuals, both black and white, who risked their own safety and freedom to assist them. One entry, dated April 2, 1847, described a particularly tense moment that highlights the sheer terror and quick thinking involved. "Today we nearly encountered disaster," he wrote. "A patrol stopped the wagon transporting us, hidden beneath sacks of grain. Elizabeth, despite her terror, spoke with such conviction to the patrolman, claiming to be traveling to visit relatives in the next county. Her voice never wavered, though I could feel Catherine trembling beside me in our hiding place. When the patrol finally moved on, we dared not breathe for what seemed like hours." This account not only underscores Elizabeth's incredible bravery and resourcefulness, but also the constant gnawing fear that accompanied every step of their journey. Samuel's journal also offered profound insights into the complex emotions he experienced during and after the escape. He wrote of a pervasive guilt over leaving behind family members still enslaved on the Caldwell plantation, a burden that many fugitives carried. He detailed the disorientation and overwhelming sense of newfound freedom, a liberty that was simultaneously exhilarating and frightening. He spoke of the constant vigilance required to maintain their precarious safety in Philadelphia, a city that, while free, was still vulnerable to the Fugitive Slave Act. Particularly poignant were his reflections on his deepening relationship with Catherine. In one entry from 1852, he wrote, "C sometimes speaks of what she gave up to be with me. I remind her that I know precisely what she sacrificed, perhaps better than she does herself. There are days when I see her watching women in fine dresses from our window, and I wonder if she regrets her choice. Then she turns to me, and I see in her eyes the same resolve that led her to choose this life, this freedom, this love, imperfect as it may be." This passage beautifully captures the mutual understanding and deep affection that bound them, acknowledging the immense cost of their choices while affirming the profound value of their shared life.
The journal also revealed that communication between the twins and their former home was not entirely severed after their departure. Samuel described Catherine's correspondence with Margaret Sullivan, the former housekeeper who had initially noted the twins' unusual behavior. Margaret, who had moved to Richmond following Thomas Caldwell's death, apparently served as a discreet source of information about events in Georgia and the aftermath of the twins' disappearance. Through these clandestine letters, Catherine learned of her father's death and her uncle's assumption of control over the plantation. It was this information that eventually prompted her fateful and incredibly risky return visit to Georgia in 1865, a decision that Samuel described in his journal as foolhardy but necessary for her peace of mind. His entry following her return from this journey suggests that the meeting with Edward Caldwell did not provide the closure Catherine had sought. "She returned more troubled than when she left," he wrote, "carrying the weight of her father's final days. The knowledge that he died believing she had been taken against her will, perhaps murdered, haunts her in a way I cannot soothe. This highlights the lingering emotional scars, even after achieving freedom." In 1967, another significant piece of the puzzle emerged when researchers located church records from a small African Methodist Episcopal congregation in Philadelphia. These records meticulously documented the baptism of the Johnson and Davis children, with godparents listed for each. Remarkably, Elizabeth served as godmother to Catherine's firstborn son, while Catherine was godmother to Elizabeth's daughter, strongly suggesting that the sisters maintained their close bond despite the challenges and geographical distance of their new lives. These records also revealed that both families moved several times within Philadelphia and Boston, likely in response to growing concerns about the Fugitive Slave Act and the increased risk of capture and re-enslavement. The frequency of these relocations, approximately every 2 years, speaks volumes about the persistent anxiety and insecurity that must have characterized their lives during this period, even in the supposedly free North. By 1855, according to city directories and tax records, Samuel Johnson had established a modest but successful livery business in a predominantly immigrant neighborhood of Philadelphia. This business provided sufficient income for the family to purchase a small home, an extraordinary achievement given the circumstances of their arrival in the city just 8 years earlier, and a testament to Samuel's entrepreneurial spirit and hard work. Elijah and Elizabeth, meanwhile, had moved from Boston to a small farming community in western Massachusetts by 1854. Local records indicate Elijah worked as a carpenter and cabinet maker, while Elizabeth supplemented their income by teaching reading and basic arithmetic to local children. Their relative isolation in this rural setting may have offered an additional layer of security, removing them somewhat from the intense scrutiny and danger they might have faced in a larger, more transient city. One of the most intriguing discoveries came in 1968 when a researcher examining records of abolitionist organizations identified Katherine Johnson and Elizabeth Davis as contributors to several anti-slavery publications. Writing under carefully chosen pseudonyms, the sisters produced a series of anonymous letters describing the moral corruption of the slave system from the deeply personal perspective of those who had been raised within it, intimately witnessing its dehumanizing effects on both the enslaved and the enslavers. These powerful letters, published in The Liberator and other prominent abolitionist newspapers between 1852 and 1858, never revealed the authors' true identities or specific circumstances, but spoke powerfully to the profound psychological damage inflicted by slave ownership, not only on the enslaved, but also on the enslavers themselves. In one such letter, strongly believed to be written by Elizabeth, the author described slavery as a poison that corrupts the soul of the master as surely as it breaks the body of the slave, a system that renders true human connection impossible across its artificially maintained boundaries. This intellectual engagement with the abolitionist cause shows their continued commitment to justice and their refusal to remain silent even in their new, fragile freedom. The Civil War brought new challenges and opportunities for both families, a period of intense hope and profound uncertainty. Samuel's journal entries from 1861 through 1865 express both fervent hope and deep fear about the conflict's potential outcomes. He wrote of sending financial contributions to support Union efforts, of attending community meetings where news from the battlefront was eagerly shared, and of the community's collective anxiety about what a Confederate victory might mean for free blacks in the North, whose hard-won freedom could be instantly revoked. A particularly moving entry from January 1863, following the Emancipation Proclamation, reads, "Today marks the beginning of what we have dreamed of for so long. Though the proclamation's practical effects may be limited, its moral significance cannot be overstated. For the first time, this nation has officially declared what we have always known to be true, that no man has the right to own another." E. and I celebrated quietly, unable to fully express in words what this day means to us who have lived both sides of this terrible divide. This captures the complex mix of joy, relief, and continued apprehension that characterized the period. The post-war period brought a relative sense of security as the legal abolition of slavery removed the most immediate and terrifying threat facing the families. However, census records and other documents from this period suggest they continued to live somewhat guarded lives, never fully revealing their backgrounds, even as the immediate danger of re-enslavement receded. The habits of caution and secrecy, ingrained over decades, were not easily shed. In 1873, tragedy struck the Johnson family when Samuel died unexpectedly of pneumonia at approximately 50 years of age. His death certificate, located in Philadelphia City Records, lists his occupation as business owner and his race as colored, with no indication of his extraordinary life journey from enslavement to freedom and entrepreneurship. Katherine never remarried. City directories show she continued to operate the livery business with the help of her eldest son until 1881, when she sold the business and moved to the home of her daughter in upstate New York. She died there in 1890 at approximately 65 years of age, having lived a life of quiet dignity and enduring courage. Elizabeth outlived her sister by nearly a decade, passing away in 1900 at her farm in Massachusetts, surrounded by children and grandchildren. According to family letters shared by descendants, in her final years, she occasionally shared carefully edited stories of her youth in Georgia, always omitting the more dangerous aspects of her escape and new identity, protecting her family from the potentially disruptive truths of their origins.
One of the most remarkable documents to emerge from this meticulous research was a letter Elizabeth wrote to her granddaughter on the occasion of the young woman's 18th birthday in 1895. In this profound letter, preserved by family members and eventually donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society, Elizabeth offered life advice drawn from her extraordinary and challenging experiences, though still without revealing their full, dangerous extent. "My dearest girl," she wrote, "as you stand at the threshold of womanhood, I wish to impart to you the most valuable lesson my long life has taught me, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to act in spite of it. There will come moments in your life when you must choose between what is expected and what is right, between the comfortable path and the true one. In those moments, remember that the most difficult choice often leads to the greatest freedom. I have known both captivity and liberty in this life, though perhaps not in the ways you might imagine, and I can tell you without hesitation that no comfort or luxury is worth the price of a compromised soul." This powerful testament to her unwavering moral compass, though veiled, provides a window into the profound strength and integrity that guided her life. The historical record remains frustratingly incomplete regarding many aspects of the Caldwell twins' story. No authenticated photographs of the sisters have ever been located, leaving their precise likenesses to imagination. However, a daguerreotype believed to show Samuel and Catherine's oldest son, taken in Philadelphia around 1870, resides in the collection of the Georgia Historical Society. The young man bears a striking resemblance to descriptions of Thomas Caldwell from contemporary accounts, a genetic echo that silently speaks volumes about the complex, intertwined family history that defied the era's rigid racial boundaries.
In 1969, an archaeological excavation at the former site of the Caldwell Plantation uncovered the foundations of the slave quarters and recovered several poignant artifacts. Among these was a small, intricately carved wooden bird that, according to Catherine's diary, was a cherished gift from Samuel to her. This tangible connection to their relationship now sits in a museum collection, a silent witness to a love that dared to defy the oppressive boundaries of its time, a small object imbued with immense historical and emotional weight. The story of the Caldwell twins has inspired numerous academic papers, several historical novels, and at least one stage play. Yet it remains relatively unknown outside academic circles, perhaps because it complicates comfortable narratives about the antebellum South. It challenges both Southern mythologies of benevolent plantation life and Northern assumptions about clear moral boundaries between the regions, forcing a more nuanced and uncomfortable reckoning with history. What makes the Caldwell case truly unique is not merely that it represents an example of interracial relationships in the antebellum South. Such relationships were, in fact, far more common than officially acknowledged, though usually involving white men and enslaved women, often in contexts of exploitation and power imbalance rather than mutual choice and affection. Rather, its profound significance lies in the meticulously documented evidence of white Southern women who not only formed deep romantic attachments to enslaved men, but acted on those feelings in the most radical way possible, by deliberately rejecting their privileged positions, staging their own abduction, and fleeing with their chosen partners to build entirely new lives. In 1968, during an interview conducted as part of an oral history project, a great-granddaughter of Elizabeth and Elijah Davis reflected on her family's extraordinary legacy. "When I think about what they risked," she mused, "not just their comfort or status, but potentially their lives for love and for what they believed was right, it humbles me. They had the courage to look at the world they were born into and say, 'No, this is wrong and I will not be part of it,' even when that decision cost them nearly everything. That's a kind of moral courage that's rare in any era. This sentiment encapsulates the enduring power of their story, a testament to the human capacity for profound moral clarity and courageous action against immense odds. The Caldwell twins' story now exists in that liminal space between documented history and enduring legend. The core facts that Elizabeth and Catherine Caldwell disappeared from their father's plantation in March 1847, along with 2 enslaved men, that they resurfaced in the North with new identities and families, and that Catherine briefly returned to Georgia after the Civil War, are supported by substantial corroborating documentary evidence. Yet many intimate details remain elusive, existing only in fragments of diaries, in letters with missing pages, and in fading memories passed down through generations. Like so many stories of resistance to slavery, particularly those involving women and marginalized voices, the full truth has been obscured by time, by deliberate concealment by those who sought to protect family honor, and by a historical record that often failed to preserve the rich, complex experiences of those who defied convention. In 2002, a final significant discovery added another poignant layer to the story. During the renovation of a former boarding house in Philadelphia, a building that had once provided shelter to numerous Underground Railroad fugitives, workers discovered a small cavity in a chimney. Within this hidden recess was a cloth pouch containing a gold locket with miniature portraits, exquisitely detailed, believed to be of the Caldwell twins as young women. Inside the locket was a folded paper bearing the simple, evocative words, Elizabeth and Catherine, Georgia, 1844. Experts who examined the locket believe it may have been deliberately hidden by Catherine before her return journey to Georgia in 1865, perhaps as an insurance policy, a safeguard against the possibility that she might not return from her dangerous visit to the South. If this interpretation is correct, the locket represents a profoundly moving acknowledgement of the dangers she still faced, even after the legal end of slavery, in confronting her past. The portraits themselves show 2 young women, identical in their heart-shaped faces and serious expressions, dressed in the fashionable attire of privileged Southern belles of the 1840s. Nothing in these conventional images hints at the extraordinary choices these women would make just 3 short years later, choices that would lead them to abandon the world these portraits represented and embrace lives they could scarcely have imagined at the time they were painted. Today, the descendants of the Caldwell twins, of Samuel and Elijah, live throughout the United States. Many remain unaware of their connection to this remarkable story, a testament to the effectiveness of the historical silence that surrounded their ancestors' choices. Those who do know their family history often speak of the complex legacy it represents, of the moral courage shown by their ancestors, but also of the complicated reality that the Caldwell twins were both beneficiaries of and rebels against a system of profound injustice. The former Caldwell plantation land has been transformed by time and relentless development, with suburban homes now standing where cotton once grew. The small historical marker, weathered by decades of sun and rain, offers no hint of the deep human drama that unfolded there. Visitors to the area would never know that this seemingly unremarkable intersection was once the setting for an extraordinary act of defiance against the most fundamental social institution of its time. Perhaps that very invisibility is fitting. The story of the Caldwell twins is, at its heart, about the invisible threads that connect human beings across artificially imposed boundaries. It is about the quiet rebellions that often go unrecorded, about the courage to imagine a different kind of life than the one society has prescribed. In her final diary entry before her escape, Catherine Caldwell wrote, "Tomorrow we step into darkness, not knowing if we will find light on the other side. But even the darkness of uncertainty is preferable to the false brightness of a life built on others' suffering. Whatever comes, we have chosen our path freely, perhaps the first truly free choice of our lives. That profound choice, made on a March night in 1847 by two privileged young women and two enslaved men, continues to echo through time. It stands as a powerful testament to the force of individual conscience in the face of overwhelming social pressure, and to the enduring human capacity for moral awakening even in the most unlikely circumstances. The sound of that echo grows fainter with each passing year, as those who remembered the story firsthand pass away, as documents yellow and crumble, as the physical traces of the Caldwell plantation dissolve into the Georgia soil. Yet it persists, a whisper from the past that still possesses the power to disturb and inspire, challenging us to examine our own lives, our own moral compromises, our own courage or lack thereof in the face of injustice. In that sense, perhaps the story of the Caldwell twins is not really about the past at all, but profoundly about the present and the future, about the choices we make, the boundaries we accept or reject, and the kind of world we choose to build or maintain. Their legacy lives not in monuments or markers, but in the ongoing human struggle to recognize and honor the humanity in ourselves and others, whatever the cost. And so the story ends where it began, with four young people stepping into the darkness of a Georgia night, leaving behind everything familiar for the uncertain yet intoxicating promise of freedom. We know now that they found their way to that freedom, imperfect though it was. What we can never fully know is the immeasurable courage it took to take that first step, to turn their backs on the only world they had ever known, to choose an uncertain future over a compromised present. In that single pivotal moment of choice lies the very heart of their story, a moment that continues to resonate through time, inviting us to consider what we might be willing to risk for love, for justice, and for the chance to live according to our deepest values rather than the expectations of others. It is a question without a simple answer, but one worth asking again and again as we all make our own ways through the darkness, forever seeking the light.